If you couldn't tell, this is a brand new setup, and we're hoping that you like it. It's a little different. We're hoping that this makes things more interesting for you, but welcome back, or welcome to People in Policy, where we talk about political events and policies, and that's what we're talking about today. So, what is today's topic, Ari?
Yeah, today's topic is going to be about the defunding of PBS and NPR. So
Let's get into
let's
it.
start. Period.
So, the first question is, why has President Trump ordered the defunding of NPR and PBS?
So on April 15, 2025, the White House released an article stating that, quote, for years, American taxpayers have been on the hook for subsidizing National Public Radio, NPR, and the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, which spread radical woke propaganda disguised as news, end quote. And then on May 1st, 2025, President Donald Trump issued an executive order to, quote, end taxpayer subsidization of biased media. And in that executive order, it stated that at the very least, Americans have the right to expect that if their tax dollars fund public broadcasting at all, they fund only fair, accurate, unbiased, and nonpartisan news coverage. And that this executive order will prevent any federal funding to go towards PBS and NPR, and they will not receive taxpayer funds through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So basically, what Trump is saying is that these news sources are no longer unbiased, and that they are kind of sending a more left-leaning message, and that because they are biased, that taxpayer dollars should not be going to biased media.
Yeah, so it's basically saying that they're not necessarily only ending, or I guess not ending, but ending the funding for these news broadcasting places because they're biased. And so they're not like necessarily doing it because they don't like the bias and because they just don't like the stations, I guess, but because they don't really appreciate how so much funding from all different people in the United States, like everyone, is going towards this media when it's like not everyone supports it, not everyone is leaning that same way. So why is everyone still funding it? And that's kind of the argument that's come out about that. And scholars from the Cato Institute have been calling for the defunding of the CPB, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, since 1977. So for them, this is a pretty big win. And yeah, they believe that they don't need taxpayer money for competition in the market if they can already support themselves a good amount and they're already biased media. And that's the opinions that have been that have come out so that this could be passed.
Right. So, what has been done so far?
Well, the 2025 Rescissions Act eliminates $8 billion dollars in funds for foreign aid and $1.1 billion dollars in funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And it was signed on May 1st, 2025, went into effect straight away, and it's planned to continue for the next 2 years. So, yeah, it's basically just an act for a lot of less funding for mostly foreign aid, but that's not really what we're discussing today. But, billions of dollars for ending funding for public broadcasting. And yeah.
Yeah. Um, so also what has been done is that NPR and PBS have both sued the Trump administration for violating the First Amendment of free speech. And that's kind of all that's happened with that so far. They have gone to court, but as of right now, the um, lawsuit is still within it's still in process, right? So not much has been done since, and it might continue, it might not, just because like we said, this order is like currently enacted. So
Yeah, both broadcasting networks have sued both NPR and PBS for very similar reasons because they violate free speech, or PBS called it, quote, viewpoint discrimination. And they also claim that Trump doesn't have the authority to pass this kind of law. So that's kind of the arguments against this kind of thing, along with various different perspectives that say that this is going to harm certain people. So that goes into the next question is what are the perspectives over this decision? And from various different people looking at the CEOs, looking at politicians and lawmakers, and yeah, what has led up to that?
So according to Patricia Harrison, the president and the CEO of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, she says that cutting off federal funding to public media will not only damage local stations, but it will be disruptive for millions of Americans who rely on it for things like news and information. And she says that these stations help them make decisions about their lives and how they decide to participate in communities. And she believes that it could be harmful for that reason.
Basically, lawmakers and especially like senators, Republicans from different states have come out to say that um, this is overall a win, while others like Democrats or the CEOs have come out to say that this is going to be harmful, even for those who voted for this kind of for President Trump, I guess, and it's going to hurt those rural communities and yeah, so but however the Pew Research Center sent out a survey and it said that 43% of US adults surveyed were for continuing funding for PBS and NPR while 24% were against it and the rest were unsure. So it shows that a significant amount of Americans were like pro funding for it. They believe that these stations were worth the funding. I think it's definitely safe to assume that not everyone knew the full story on it, but overall, a lot more people were in support than against it. And I think it's mostly like the lawmakers and what they've come out to say about it that's changed these perspectives.
Yeah, I think also it's important to note that when some of these things were in process, right, the House and the Senate were split like pretty evenly, right? These like votes to cut off like foreign aid but also public broadcasting, they were very very close, right? So we're seeing Democrats and Republicans, having like different viewpoints regardless of what their party is. And so I think that's really interesting because normally in issues or in sort of things like that, we see people tend to stick to their own party, and usually votes are not as close as these ones were. So, yeah.
Yeah. So the next question is how does this or what does this do to PBS and NPR? How's this going to impact them?
Well, PBS CEO previously said that PBS only receives 15% of its funding from the federal government. Some of its smaller stations receive a larger percentage. And she says that some of the smaller stations are at risk if the funding is cut. Um, Similarly, NPR CEO said that roughly 1% of the organization's budget comes directly from federal dollars. So, these companies aren't already getting that much money, right? Most of their funding comes from other places like viewers or, maybe they have other sponsors, but yeah, most of their funding does not come from federal dollars, which at first is kind of like what I thought when before I even started researching this, right? I thought majority of their money comes from federal dollars. So it was definitely surprising to see that it doesn't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Because it seems like on the surface that all of your money is just going towards these big stations and these big corporations, when it's actually most of the taxpayer money is going towards those smaller communities and in places like Alaska where, they only have like two stations for public radio and like broadcasting. So they don't know much. Like there's not a lot of local or statewide coverage um, for them to learn about what's going on around them, and that's what our money goes towards is for those to continue because it's not likely that they're going to get much funding, at least like not in their community, so we need to help them out and stuff like that compared to NPR and PBS that just like receive like really big stations that receive a lot of money and just in general, not only from the federal government. So, yeah, rural places are where like any taxpayer money was going towards, and now we're losing that money.
Yeah, so I mean, Valina, you definitely touched on this a little bit, but to continue, how does these decisions to defund PBS and NPR impact the average American or any American really?
Yeah. So starting off with, I mean, even like these industries. So starting off with the workers in this, they're going to be if there are like journalists, reporters, podcasters, anyone who works in like news-based industries are going to see impacts of this. They might be laid off. They might be not necessarily fired, but yeah, laid off and just not able to get the work because there is not enough money to pay for them and have that like news going on. And especially if they're, in rural areas. So that's going to be kind of harmful for everyone who works in that industry, and they're probably seeing some major effects of this, and they're probably scared, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so rural communities, often referred to as news deserts because of the lack of local news, the lack of stations, right? Would suffer. Some people believe that they would suffer, like that they would be like the main group who like feels the effects of this defunding. Um, yeah, although some people argue, right, that because NPR and PBS don't get most of their funding from federal funds, that they have very loyal listeners, watchers, watchers can even donate to these organizations, right? And because some people believe that because they have built such like a strong foundation for that, that they would be able to fully support themselves without federal funding. So it kind of just depends, honestly, on I guess where NPR and PBS decide to go from here in terms of distributing out the rest of their funding, right? Um, because like we said, those smaller stations are in bigger needs of support than maybe the more urban ones. So it's definitely going to be more of like for these companies, how do they balance out, right, their funds? Maybe they do decide to end up laying off workers or cutting out these stations like Elena mentioned, or maybe that just means less attention goes to these more urban areas so that it's more evenly balanced. We don't know. That's up to them. It's in their hands, so it's going to be interesting to see how PBS and NPR looks going forward.
Yeah. So I feel like when you look at this from just like a viewpoint of someone who's like seeing the media, or if they're on social media, you might see this as maybe like kind of detrimental, kind of like, the end of the world.
Yeah.
But it's being done because, everyone is putting in money for this. And I mean, if you're one of those people that doesn't really like taxes, this is what it's going towards. And whether you're in support or not, it was going towards those rural communities. So those are the people who are going to see the effects. And it's not necessarily like, oh my gosh, now we're like, it's not like we're ending big, like we're ending complete funding. Like
Yeah.
nothing's these things aren't going to be gone. It's just like at least not the big corporations, and that's what we need to like help, or I guess that something that needs to change is that these big corporations aren't the only ones relying on the money. It's like everyone. It's every station so that everyone gets a fair amount of education and news. And yeah, so
Yeah.
it's not the end. It's not the end for NPR and PBS. It's less for the big corporations and possibly more for the rural places. It, like you said, it just depends on where they go with it.
Yeah, we're not losing Sesame Street. We're not losing Daniel Tiger. I know that's kind of just been like a big thing, right? Like, oh, we're gonna lose like all these childhood PBS shows that we love so much. Um, you might see less of them, right? Maybe they decide that the funding is better off elsewhere, right? But they're not gonna be like completely wiped off the face of the earth, right? Like we said, it all just depends on how PBS and NPR decide to allocate um, the budget and the money that they do have without federal funding. And so, yeah, I know the media has been in a big uproar about like potentially like losing some of those shows, especially because those are shows that they watched growing up that they're sharing to their kids, or maybe shows that they still enjoy, but
Yeah, I would say the most negative outcome of this would be that we stop our funding and we stop the taxes going towards these corporations, and then we start losing, like, one by one, losing radio stations that report news, especially smaller radio stations that don't have as much money. And that would be kind of the worst case scenario, while like a better case scenario would be that the CPB goes towards, rather than completely funding their corporations, because they have less taxes and less revenue going towards them, they start funding the places that really need it, and they help out the stations that are smaller so that people in all places across the United States can receive the news that they need, um, and can, keep learning. They are aware of the things going on. So
yeah. So
yeah,
all in all, we can keep our Elmo and our Daniel Tiger and our Wildcrats. Odd Squad not really going anywhere. The money, however,
it depends on where it goes. It could go anywhere,
yeah,
but um obviously we're hoping for the best for, whoever. Everyone deserves education, and yeah, that's why we're here. We hope you really enjoyed this episode. It might be shorter, so we apologize, because we were kind of rushed. So yeah,
yeah, that's pretty much it.
thank you for watching or listening. Bye.